What is going on, Hot Take Nation? It is DRW, currently still banned, I think permanently banned from LinkedIn. So you're going to find me on the podcast and the blog site because LinkedIn has decided that what you're hearing is just too hot for social media. And today, on that topic, one of the reasons that our guest, Gregory Wrightstone, is joining us is because he recently had an issue with LinkedIn. But you may know Gregory. I certainly have followed him for a while on LinkedIn because of his book, Inconvenient Facts. And I think that's a play on, if I'm correct, Gregory, that's a play on the inconvenient truth of Al Gore.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so first of all, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't you give us like a brief intro to who you are and the project that you've been working on, both the new book and overall your theme of investigation.
Yeah, I'm a geologist. I've been doing it for 40 plus years. But I really got sucked into this a number of years ago, starting about 6 years ago, 5 years ago. I started investigating climate change because as a geologist, I knew that some of what we were being told about climate change was just wrong. It was really ocean acidification that got me going. So I knew it wasn't happening. It just wasn't. As a geologist, we know that. We look at the big picture. And as I got into it, I just looked at what I call the climate apocalypse events. And one thing after another, the science, the facts, and the data didn't match up at all with what we were being told. And I was frankly angered. What I saw as an abuse of the scientific process. And that really led to the creation of my first book, which is Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. And you talked about LinkedIn, and I'm banned right now too.
So banned, not just post down. You're not on the platform.
I'm not on the platform. You can't find me. They removed me.
Wow. I didn't know that. I thought that.
Oh yeah.
I thought you had just had a post removed, and it was.
No, I did that.
The polar bear. Oh my God.
Oh no, they sent me they said there are three things we've identified that are false. What really put them over the edge was this polar bear. I had a chart from Susan Crockford, one of the top polar bear experts in the world. I had a chart of 60 years of polar bear population history, and of course they called that as false. So no, they've erased me, taken me off. I sent them, I responded to them yesterday and said, please forgive me. I just want to get back on because I've got 6,000 or 8,000 followers or connections on LinkedIn. And my posts on LinkedIn, usually I try and post something scientifically factual that counters this idea of man-made catastrophic warming every day. And it's the rare day that I post something and I don't have 10,000 or 15,000 views within 12 hours. So, and I've been gaining, some days I got dozens of new connections wanting to connect with me because of that. LinkedIn was very good to me.
Okay, we have so much to unpack. And so for listeners, I knew that your polar bear post had been taken down. I'd also been following you for a long time. And it does certainly seem like there are narratives that are being pushed by, I don't know what else to call it, but mainstream media and climate change, but not just climate change, the climate apocalypse, that it's only negative, it's only bad. We must transform away from fossil fuels. We must do it today because our planet is burning. And the trade-offs of, well, are there going to be some northern hemispheres that have more agriculture? What happens to world population? How about the fact that 14.5% of CO2 in the world is produced by livestock? And so it's our meat eating and our mass producing of animals for our consumption that is contributing at least part of it. And then 74% of the electrical generation in the world that's coal-fired is in Asia, and we're not dealing with that. So what say you?
Let's start with CO2.
Okay.
We've increased we're like 415 or 16 parts per million right now. Before the Industrial Revolution, we were at 280, 285. So we've added about 130 parts per million. And I believe that additional CO2 is primarily from the burning of fossil fuels. And I'm okay with that because I love CO2. If you look at the back of my truck, I have bumper stickers I've made up that says I heart CO2. And I've got stickers, I don't have any on me right now, but that I heart CO2. And I'm going to be joining the CO2 Coalition as their executive director at the end of the year. And this is a group of just some of the top scientists in the world. Will Happer, Dr. Richard Lindzen from MIT, Patrick Moore, you might know as a YouTube legend, co-founder of Greenpeace. Their philosophy and my philosophy, just hand in glove, just because they and I both believe that CO2 is a hugely beneficial molecule. It should be known as the miracle molecule and not painted as this evil, the devil that's going to kill us all. So I believe that this additional CO2 increase, and there are a number of ways we can go about proving that it's mainly from man's increases, which would be probably about 92 or 3% fossil fuels, 6 or 7% from cement manufacture. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay because it's CO2 again is the miracle molecule. And we were just talking, and they need to stop any narrative that opposes man-made catastrophic warming. And we just talked about LinkedIn. You may not be aware what drove my book, Inconvenient Facts. The sales through the roof was last March. We have a way cool app that I created. It's Inconvenient Facts App that you can get for Android or iPhone. So I rolled it out. I went down to Dallas, Texas, and rolled it out. I had an interview with Glenn Beck. I did it on the Blaze TV. We introduced this. He loves the app. Again, if you're looking for it, just search for Inconvenient Facts or Inconvenient App to find it. It's powerful, powerful tool. 2 days later, Apple removed it from the App Store. They took it out, and that never happens. Okay, they said it lacked compelling content, and right. How many apps are out there that have?
I mean, I like the game. I like the game Fruit Ninja, but I would not exactly call it compelling content.
Exactly. And they said that the app doesn't provide any unique ability to use the iPhone. It could be a web-based app. And we're like, what? That was the #1 story on Drudge the next day. Drudge had me and my app being removed from Apple. It was the first time the Drudge report was saying it's the first time we've seen the App Store being weaponized for political use. And that drove, I was on that night with Laura Ingraham. She had a big segment on me and my app and my book. One American News, then just huge media storm over this removal of the app. And so the book it was #1 bestseller across, I don't know, 6 or 8 categories on Amazon. Book sales exploded. We were in the top 10 all books on Amazon for a couple of days. And so we were just selling books right and left. And my app developer says, well, Greg, I think we can, what we can do is if we can somehow incorporate the camera with your app, I think that'll envelop, you can't do that with a computer. And I said, whoa, we don't do a thing. We're going to milk this thing for all it's worth, with this book sales.
Yeah,
as long as 2 months later, we added this feature. So at the bottom, so you can now use your iPhone to take a picture. And at the bottom of the picture, there's my I Heart CO2 banner at the bottom of the picture.
Oh, that's clever. That's clever. So you're a meme generating app. So now it is allowed back on the Apple Store.
Yeah,
but previously it was not a thing. It's truly amazing. I want to go. There's so much we can talk about. I want to go to the macro. CO2 is a miracle gas. Now, people would say that's a crazy thing. Greg, how can you say CO2 is miracle? You yourself said we went from 280 parts per million to 420. We're definitely adding CO2. CO2 is a warming gas. We're warming the climate. We've warmed the earth. Catastrophe is coming. And you say, no, CO2 is a miracle. Why is it a miracle?
Yeah, well, let's go back to that. CO2 is increasing, and I agree that CO2 is a greenhouse gas that has a warming effect on the planet. It just does. To argue against that, I think, is just false. The warming effect is modest and greatly overwhelmed by the same forces that have been driving temperatures since the dawn of time. And we can see that if you only look at the last 100 years of information. And that's what most of these people do is look at 50, 100, 150 years. Well, it looks like a pretty good correlation because we had CO2 increasing and we had temperatures increasing. Well, on my app and in the book, I show the chart of the longest thermometer record in history. It's the Central England temperature record that goes back to the year 1759. And we see the warming actually started in the late 17th century. The year 1695, to be exact, was the coldest part of. So we've been warming for 300 years.
Now, what did I miss? You said that the temperature records go back to 1795, but we've been warming since the late
1659.
1659.
Sorry.
Okay, so the first temperature record is 1659, and we've been warming since then.
Right. And if there's another powerful that I can provide to you, maybe you can associate with this. If we look at atmospheric CO2 and take it back 2,000 years, or actually 1,000 years, back to the medieval warm period, that was a period between 850 and 1250 AD. It was known as the High Middle Ages. Well, we see that temperature in that period was as high, probably higher than what it is today, but CO2 was very low. And we see that through all these other periods of time. And as a geologist, I look at that. Look over the last 10,000 years, there were 9 other cycles of warming and cooling, all of them warmer than today, and all of them with much lower CO2. There's something other than CO2 driving temperature. But we're being told, oh, no, that's all changed. That all changed in the middle of the 20th century when we started adding CO2. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. That's not how science, that's not how climate works, and geology tells us that. And also, if we look throughout, it's documented, both sides of the great climate debate, and yes, Virginia, there is a debate, of the debate agree that we can look through the past ice ages and the past warming periods. We know that temperature changed first and CO2 followed it. CO2 wasn't driving temperature. Temperature was driving CO2.
So we're talking manipulated variable versus responding. And is it fair to say, so for example, if you warm, the melting of an ice cap releases more CO2? I'm not sure that that's the science of it, but what you're saying is the warming is leading to the CO2, but also that man is making CO2.
Well, recent additions to CO2 is from man-made causes. Historically, though, it's the oceans that are the great driver of CO2. A cold ocean, it's a counterintuitive, but a cold ocean sucks up CO2 into it. A warm ocean expels it. Think about if you had a liter jar of ginger ale, pull it out of your refrigerator, open it up, it just goes, right? Put that same liter jar on your patio on a kitchen in August and open it up, and it'll blow up like a volcano. That's the CO2 wanting to get out. So cold oceans absorb CO2, warm oceans expel it. And that's the way it's always worked.
Why is it? I mean, and I know that this is such a big question, but why is it that you don't get the airtime? I mean, you do when there's a big, you're censored and it comes up and then people say, oh, that's Fox News. It's all right wing, it Blaze, it's Dredge. Like, we don't listen to that because they don't know what's going on. We do. What is the counter narrative around when you look at the data, and others have, Ryan Zornquist, right? Like, you're obviously much deeper into it, but what is the counter narrative for CO2 as leading temperature as opposed to vice versa?
That's the problem we have right now. And that's why I'm looking forward to joining the CO2 coalition. I want to have, you may not realize it, you do, we're getting attacked, we're being silenced, and it's really accelerating in real time right now. This week, last week, I saw it on Facebook in the last few days. If you search for a climate skeptical Facebook page, like if you type in climate, whatever it might be, it comes up with, in Facebook, they have their set page that comes up that gives you all the facts on climate change. And you really have to search for, like, if you want to look for scientists skeptical of whatever, it's really difficult to find. And that just started last week. LinkedIn has started really, really going after people. They don't like anybody that doesn't follow the company line on COVID. They don't want somebody that doesn't follow the company line on climate change.
Yeah, I mean, so that is amazing. That to me, as a social media, when you talk about Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft through LinkedIn, Instagram through Facebook, the fact that they're censoring not false information, they're censoring data that projects a different side. How did we get here? And what does it make you feel? And we'll talk about being banned from a platform. How does it make you feel personally?
Tremendous frustration. I have so much information that really needs to be in the public hands. But again, it goes against this narrative of catastrophic man-made warming. And again, we're seeing this, the CO2 coalition in particular, of all the groups out there, has been attacked the most for allegedly posting false information. What they're doing, there was 3 weeks ago, there was a letter from Stacey Abrams, Tom Steyer, Elizabeth Warren, specifically written to Zuckerberg, complaining that he was allowing this dissemination of false information by the CO2 coalition. And so I've got ideas of how we can get the information out there. And so I'll be doing that. We need to get this information out there. And then that's the challenge. I can get on talk radio. I did over 300 interviews in 2019 on both radio and TV. I'm Laura Ingram's. You have to forgive me. I've got a little
no, and we're socially distancing over Zoom. Plus, back in the day, if you had a cold and didn't go up for work, your boss would say, "What's wrong with you? You're a moocher and a welcher, and you don't go to work." And now, if you have a sniffle because you have young kids who lick every toy known to man, and then come home and kiss you, yet somehow now you're dangerous. But for the last 150 years, you have been totally fine and non-contagious.
Oh yeah, and I got this cold from what hopefully is a cold from my grandkids. So, but that's what it is.
So you do interviews to get the data.
How do we get this information out there? But I'm preaching to the choir when I go on. I'm Laura Ingram's go-to guy for climate change. I've been on with Tucker. I've got conservative radio talk show hosts all over the country that I'm on with a lot. But again, I'm preaching to the choir, and they're not. They need that information. They need to be empowered with data, and that's really the challenge. I've got some ideas of what to do when we join the CO2 coalition. One of the things I will recommend, this app here, it has all the information in the book, and it's powerful. That's why if you're at Thanksgiving dinner coming up here and your idiot nephew Billy, everybody's got an idiot nephew Billy that majored in sustainable development at Texas A&M, and he goes, "Oh, Uncle David, did you know the polar bears are going extinct?" And you'll go, "Well, wait a minute, Billy. Here's fact number 52, 60 years of polar bear population, Billy." And he'll go, whoa. But we've got this, all of the charts that we have, all 60 inconvenient facts, are fully sourced and referenced. And many of them I've got, and so that's a powerful tool to use. You can't carry a book with you all the time. You can have this app with your data, CO2 data. One of the most powerful charts that I like to use is that I look at the last 140 years of CO2 data. It just shows this drastic decline from 2,600 parts per million down to the end of the last ice age. We got to the perilously low and dangerous level of 180 parts per million. And why is it dangerous? Because at 150 parts per million, plant life can't survive.
Right.
That would be a problem. That would be a really big problem. And we nearly got there in the recent geologic past. So what we have, when you look at the big picture in CO2, we don't have too much CO2. We don't have enough. we're actually CO2 impoverished. If we look through all of Earth's history back to the Precambrian, the average CO2 was 2,500 parts per million. That's 6.5 times what we are today. And so,
well, and now what would the negative impact, assuming, again, we both know as scientists, there's causality and then there's links, but you can never look at a data set. And one of my favorite episodes, just in terms of talking, is with a Daniel DiMartino Booth or a Mark Rossano or a Mark Mills, where you're talking through, well, you need to understand the supply of oil, the demand of oil, the geopolitics in the Middle East, the way that cheating occurs, the economies, the taxes, the religions, the boundaries drawn in World War II. Like, so there's like 37 things, and then you're supposed to say, and I think oil will be $37. And you and I both know you can't look at one factor and say fossil fuels rise CO2, therefore fossil fuels are bad, because there's so much. But what would happen at 2,500 parts per million for
life would be good. Life would be good.
Life would be good.
We're already seeing the benefits of rising CO2 levels with plant growth. There's nothing harmful with high levels of CO2. In fact, it's not the EPA, whoever takes care of health and safety issues for the workplace, state that it's only really about over 10,000 parts per million. Once you get to that point, it's really when you get up above 10,000 when you start having possible health problems with that. And remember, that's 10,000 parts per million. That would still be about
1%.
That would be
1%,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
1%. So it's still what we're seeing is a greening of the earth. The increase, the combination of rising temperatures, and we've gone up about 0.8 of a degree centigrade, which is about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit, over since the beginning of the 20th century. Doesn't sound like much, but it affects things like crop growth, growing seasons. The tundra is retreating to the north, as is the tree lines are moving northward. But we see that the combination of a modest rise in temperature along with increasing CO2 is leading to what's called a greening of the earth. And by greening, they mean they measure, and this is from NASA, it says this. NASA says that up to 50% of the earth is greening or vegetation's increasing. Less than 4% of the earth is what they call browning or loss of vegetation. That's a pretty good trade-off. I'll take that any day of the week. Too bad if you're in that 4%, but the bulk of the earth is just, the vegetation is just exploding in nearly every niche. Deserts are shrinking. If you look at the Sahara, there's an area known as the Sahel in the southern Sahara that's, people are moving back into these areas. It's turning into a lush grassland. People haven't lived there in hundreds or even thousands of years. They're moving back in there. So if your listeners are going, this guy Whitestone, he's crazy, just Google NASA and greening and see what you find, and you'll be amazed. And I call it the biggest untold story of the late 20th and early 21st century. Is this earth that's thriving and prospering? And we look at, and that's part of this second book I'm writing. I look at what's actually happening today. The alarmists will say, we're going to have, it's fires and floods and droughts and hurricanes and tornadoes. But if you look at what's actually happening today, almost every metric, both the Earth's ecosystems and extreme weather, the ecosystems are thriving, and extreme weather related deaths are decreasing. They just are. And people just don't know that.
I hope
being lied to.
I hope that listeners.
Let me just
go.
Let me tell you what my philosophy is about climate change. My philosophy is we should use all of the Earth's resources for the benefit of mankind and do it as good stewards. That's what we should do. If you've had Mark Mills on and some of the others, obviously they talk about how energy benefits humanity, and it does. In fact, we've got a white paper coming out with the CO2 Coalition. The tentative title is African Lives Matter, and it's an exploration of how Africa could benefit from coal-fired electricity development. That's another subject, but it's fascinating in Africa that they have brownouts and blackouts on a daily basis across the continent. And whenever that occurs, they have all these, I didn't know it, they have backup diesel generators all over the continent to kick on. Caleb that wrote the author, he says, you can go to Nairobi and they start to have a brownout. You can hear diesel, you can hear all these generators kicking on, belching black smoke, out there that are harming the air that people are going to be breathing in. And so what they're lacking is reliable, abundant, affordable energy.
And,
but again,
and
that's a topic for another day.
I totally agree. And we've covered that a couple of times with Brian Zorn and Chris Wright. And the overarching thing is this concept of trade-offs, is that we like, to have all the toys in our yard. And by our yard, I mean North America, where we have an unbelievably good standard of living. And we're not willing to degrowth, which is the big word around, if the objective was to lower CO2 emissions, you would have to degrow, which means making different choices. But we don't ever have those conversations in the context of, in Africa, the standard of living and the access to power, and that electricity is what has allowed people to live longer and prosper and have better lives and not have slaves. And like the whole thing is because of energy, and yet we have sort of one argument here and one argument there. I'm curious your thought, because it used to be called global warming, and it is global warming, but now we've pivoted to climate change. And so every time there's a fire or a tornado or a rainstorm or a drought, it's always just everyone is, well, that's the evidence of climate change. Why did they make that change, and what do you respond to that?
I think it was a great marketing ploy on their part. Now you can use anything that seems to be out of place or different, and say it's climate disruption or whatever they're calling it today. And that was the one they were using a few weeks ago. Don't use climate change anymore. Climate crisis, climate disruption. We need to get people scared.
Urgent, scared. Yeah, for sure.
And again, I just don't see it. I see, if you actually look what's going on, we see an Earth that's thriving and prospering, and it's not even close. That's why I'm writing this next book. I've really identified two issues. We can narrow climate change down to two issues. The first one I deal in the book is called the alarmists, Dr. Michael Mann at Penn State and others will tell you that we're in an era of unprecedented and unusual warming, that we've never seen anything like this. By this, I mean temperature. In 2,000 years or 6,000 years, it's unusual and unprecedented. If that were the case, if 20th century and 21st century was indeed unusual and unprecedented on the scale of thousands of years, well, that would be a strong argument, wouldn't it, for man's increases in the CO2 is driving the temperature. It just is. If, on the other hand, it's not unusual and it's not unprecedented, but rather looking throughout geologic history, particularly the last 10,000 years, if we saw periodic cycles that were warm, cold, and those warm periods were as warm or warmer than we are today, then that's a strong supportive argument for that this is just another naturally driven cycle we're in. We're just cycling in and out of cold, and we happen to be thankfully in a warm spot right now. And the other thing, so I in my new book, I'm systematically destroying that idea of unusual and unprecedented warming. The other half is our climate change, temperature and CO2, is it leading to catastrophic, horrible consequences, or is it leading to beneficial consequences? And again, I'm going to be dealing with, I'll be leaping into that when I get through with it. Right now, I'm dealing with human history and climate and the relationship. And what your listeners may not realize, if we look through human history the last several thousand years, each of these previous warm periods, before climate science became politicized, those warm periods, the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period, they were called climate optima. And they were called climate optima because both Earth's ecosystems and humanity thrived. There's a strong relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations. There just is. The horrible temperatures that caused mass depopulation is the cold, or are the cold periods. They go by the names like the Greek Dark Ages, the Dark Ages, and the most recent was the Little Ice Age. Each one of these cold periods is associated with crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. Fear the cold. We're being told fear the heat. No, welcome the heat. Welcome the heat. Historically, it's been really, really good for humanity, and civilizations thrive. And do we have time? I can tell you.
We have all the time. We have all the time. We're not quite Joe Rogan where we can go for 3 hours. But and what I love is you talk about the listeners, and I wanted to tie back to that. What I love about, and the hot take of the day, listeners and readers, is I hope the number of times people write out and they say, I really enjoy what you put out. I don't always agree with you. You shouldn't agree with me. This should not be an echo chamber. This should be about hearing someone and getting an expert who has, and it's beyond an opinion because you've done the science, but let's just call it an opinion. And people, instead of rejecting it and then saying, Billy at Thanksgiving dinner says, yeah, but this, buy the book, read, get the app, see what the answers are and make your own mind up. But making your mind up on a topic that you've read, like a headline in the New York Times, is not what our listeners do. So I never worry about that. And we have all the time in the world.
All right. Well, let me tell you, this is a pretty interesting story. So we had been, during the medieval warm period, this was a time, it was called the High Middle Ages. When you think of the Middle Ages and the medieval life, great Gothic cathedrals were created, the Magna Carta, the earth thrived. They had bountiful harvests. There were some bad years, but it was mostly they could rely on beneficial growing seasons. And then at the end of the 13th century, it started getting cold. We started going into the Little Ice Age. Famine set in. People started dying on weather-causing witches. And they started killing these weather-causing witches. And in the 14th century, the Pope Pius, I think, was actually issued a papal bull that stated, yes, there is such a thing as weather-causing witches. And if you find them, you need to kill them. And man, they did. And so there were somewhere around 50,000 witches that were, most of them burned at the stake during about a 300 to 350 year period. And then around 1500, it warmed up. Now you're going to be, I got a question for you here. So it warmed up. The crops came back. Harvest came back. Why was that?
Because we killed all the witches.
Exactly.
We killed 50,000 witches, and also we were creating CO2 really by burning them at the stake. We were causing global warming.
Yeah. So they said, man, we did really good. We killed all the witches. Now harvests are back. Aunt Sarah's alive. We can plant our wheat and our barley and brew our beer. And that lasted for about 40 years, and then it really started getting cold. And that's when the big witch hunts got in. I wish I had I'll have to send you, I've just created a chart. Christopher Pfister, my favorite historian's got, from his book, I got permission for him to use it. I've got a chart I created. On the top part of the chart, it's witches killed per decade. In the bottom part of the chart, it relates it to temperature. And there's this great correlation between the number of witches that were killed and the temperature, because the colder it got, the less, things bad. The story here is bad things happen when it gets cold, and it's just opposite of what we're being told. We're being told, oh my God, we can't let it get 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees warmer. It's going to, we're all going to die, and there'll be heat waves and famine. No, that's already happened. It's already happened multiple times in the past. We can look in history and find out when it was 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees warmer, and we can see that life thrived, humanity thrived. We all thrived during those warmer periods than what it is today. And that's why Dr. Michael Mann and the others needed to erase the medieval warm period.
So the witches thing is really interesting because, again, it's a microcosm to the world. And I always, especially for the energy readers, and I came to LinkedIn fame, now infamous on LinkedIn, or just non-existent on LinkedIn, was because I was writing about energy.
We've got Patrick Moore, Dr. Patrick Moore, who was co-founder of Greenpeace. He's the chair of the CO2 Coalition. I'm in contact with him, maybe not on a daily basis, but pretty
Co-founder
often.
of Greenpeace is on the CO2 Coalition.
He's the chair of the CO2 Coalition.
Okay.
If you just Google Patrick Moore, he has a video that was up that had 3.5 million views or something. He's very, very well known. And he's got a new book coming out next month. But he got banned from Facebook, taken down because of he an interview with him. And in the interview, he was asked about climate change. And they said, well, is climate change happening? And he said, of course it is. It's always happened. Climate has been changing. You know, the odd thing would be is if it's not changing. That was called false information. Like they said from Facebook, and they removed it and they took down, I think it was YouTube, took down the video. I'm not sure all the details for stating that. And that's just factually correct. So what we're going to go, when I get back with working with him, he and I will probably sit down and go through, we're going to fight that. And we'll use my data from my book to prove that actually is correct.
So let me ask a question, because we are going to pivot off. I think that there's lots of great information, and I haven't read the book yet. I'm ordering it as soon as we're done. Ordering two.
One for Billy.
Inconvenient Facts, and it's by Gregory Wrightstone. And there's an app that you can get. I'm going to check that out too. I think that's super cool. We don't do, this isn't monetization. Gregory and I have never met before. I just think it's important to educate yourself. So we're going to pivot off both of those topics, and I'm going to ask you this question. Some of the feedback that I got on Twitter when I got kicked off LinkedIn was, it's their platform. They can choose what message they want and what voices they want to amplify. And if you didn't play nicely in the sandbox, it is their choice. So not only do you have no recourse, but I don't even feel bad for you. And so just take it and move on. I'm curious how you feel about that. You know, as a person, right? As a business model as well, but as a person.
Well, I'd like to be able to, it's this blob out there that says you're lying, but there's nothing we can do. You've just some person that's deciding what's truth and what's fact and what's lies. And we can't, I like to fight something with science, facts, and data, and you can't do it in this case. You know, it's either like some 26-year-old with a man bun sitting in Burbank deciding, we can't have that out there.
Right.
And I think I think I'll get back on LinkedIn at some point, maybe soon, because I didn't want to go through all the detail arguing, because it was going to be pointless, because they said it's false. And no matter how much data I would give them, they weren't going to agree with me. So I just said, I'm really sorry if I violated any of your terms of agreement, and I'll never do it again in the future. That's all I did. I said, I won't post any. And I think they'll probably go, okay. But then I'm going to let everybody know, once I get back on LinkedIn, you know, I'm probably be deplatformed forever the next time I post anything about climate change that's factually incorrect. So please go and sign up at my website for my newsletter. You know, if you like what I say, and that website is inconvenientfacts.xyz.
I thought the .xyz was pretty cool. I like that people are moving away from the .com, because remember, people used to buy websites that had like cool names, and they'd be like, haha, you must own it. But as we move away to the .com, .biz, .xyz, whatever, it opens the internet again.
The .com was available, and they had it up for sale for $2,000. And it had been up for sale for 15 years, inconvenientfacts.com. And it's still there. If somebody wants, if there's some enterprising soul wants to buy it for me, go ahead. Or give me $20,000. But what you're going to do is, so I went and I said, well, I got advice from GoDaddy. They said, well, maybe they'll take $800. And I said, okay, so I offered them $800. Within 12 hours, the price had gone up to $20,000. They said, no, I don't think so. So I said, well,
I like it, .xyz. And I think that, again, these are the things that as we progress and as the business model evolves, every capitalism, the good part of capitalism is people always figure workarounds. So like whatever it is, you buy .com, you're like, haha, I own this forever. I have a revenue source. And then someone goes, we're going to try the .xyz. Oh, now we're going to try the .zyx or whatever.
You'll be interested on this. Our Norwegian language version of the book was just published last week. I was supposed to be in Norway. We had planned for me to have a trip to Norway. We were going to go places, and I was going to have speaking gigs, and we were also going to travel parts of Europe. Of course, we can't do that with COVID. But it was real. They sought me out. They're called the Norwegian Climate Realists. It's been selling briskly. Norway is a fairly small country compared to the United States, but they had, within the first week, I think they had sold 500 books or so, which is pretty good. Mm-hmm. And so it's available. The Korean language version, again, I got these people just contacted me out of the blue. The Korean language version is being created right now. So it's pretty cool to see this. And I've got contacts all over, a lot of contacts. Australia's hotbed for climate realism.
Oh, I bet, especially
and the UK.
I remember when I was a kid and you were probably a teenager. The ozone, the hole in the ozone over Australia and that big, and then the Global Action Committee to come together with CFCs. I look at it now because I was a kid then, and it didn't really impact just changing chemicals in your refrigeration. But I look at it now, and I do wonder a little bit how much was driven by a lobby of a company that had the replacement to CFCs that like vilified. And I think about Aubrey McClendon, who was using climate change as the reason to push natural gas in 2005. And he didn't care about climate change. He just wanted to make sure coal-fired generation wasn't built so that there would be natural gas generation as a demand source for natural gas. And so he sort of like did the bait and switch. So as I reflect on the CFCs as an example, the Kyoto Accord as an example, the Paris Accords as an example, I wonder how much money has actually been put in behind, because I've always said that it's about the business model. No one really cares about climate change, because if they did, they would be replacing coal-fired plants in China with wind and solar. They'd also acknowledge that to make a windmill and solar takes so much energy that if it only lasts 15 years, you might actually be carbon negative as opposed to carbon positive. But what this is really about is we want in the US, where trillions of dollars of American taxpayer dollars can be spent on infrastructure, that American companies and ergo American business people can become billionaires and trillionaires on the new investment. That to me, I know that sounds incredibly cynical, but that's really what it's about, is it's dollars, it's not climate change. I'm curious if you share a view or nuance different than that.
No, I think you're right. There's money behind this. Part of it is these people really do, some people believe it. Others, people like Dr. Michael Mann and some of the scientists that, as I was going through for my new book, looking at how they came up and the pseudoscience that was used to promote this scam. And it is a scam. And the scam is not that it's not happening, but rather that
the impact
our temperatures are unusual and unprecedented. You'll be angered. Anyone who reads my book, the first half of it, where I go through point by point the mistakes, fabrication of data. They truncated data instead of using the whole portions of data. They cherry picked what they wanted to use. They cherry picked the data sets to use. It just in some cases they took data from the first 200 or 300 years of data sets, turned it upside down and put it in the 20th century. They just copied and pasted. They made up stuff, and it's just time after time after time. We just see that, and right now they can't go back on this. They're so heavily invested, and anybody that's in this, if you're a scientist and you've bought into this, it's hard to change your mind. It's hard because you've invested now most of your career in what I think is a hoax. The hoax is
the negative impact.
Mostly man-made, and that it's leading to catastrophic consequences. It's not, and it's not. Both of those things are just false. And for these people to walk away from that, and that's why you probably laugh at me. I think I was put on earth for a reason. And I think it's to promote this message. I think I've worked my entire career, my entire life leading to this moment where I'm going to be working with all these scientists, the CO2 Coalition, to publish my new book. I believe that this it's so important that this information get out there. And I'm going to do everything I can to get that out there. The challenge is, how do we communicate this with the regular person? I've got some ideas about that, but it's going to take a lot of money. I'll be leading a fundraising effort for the CO2 Coalition to get that. It's an expensive thing to do, communication, and it takes a lot of money. But I think we have the science behind us. So many of these other groups, I love them. I was part of the Heartland Institute. There are a number of other groups, but there's no other group like the CO2 Coalition. Just some of the top atmospheric physicists, climate scientists, Dr. Patrick Moore, Dr. Pat Michaels, who wrote Meltdown. He's one of the top climatologists in the world. And that's my mission, is to communicate the falsehoods of man-made catastrophic warming and to promote the benefits of modestly rising temperature and increasing CO2. And it's a challenge. So I'm going to be coming to your people for a donation in January. So
there you go. Well, and
donate to the coalition.
Doesn't that kind of make the point, is that this message is out there so effectively and so dominating the airways, and yet in order to counter the message, the answer is, I need money, which therefore is follow the money and you'll know why that message is being propagated. Now, last question for you. Oh, go ahead.
No, it's good. Ask away.
So my last question for you was going to be, if you were to go back and meet yourself 20 or 30 years ago, and you think of the way you were and think of what you know now, and you were to give yourself some advice that would positively impact the career of someone else in that same place today, what would you tell yourself that would really, I think, meaningfully step you forward in your career or in your life, that would be helpful advice?
Buy IBM. Seriously. Be nice to everybody. I think one thing I've learned, and I try to be, but you can usually find a point, if somebody's really done something bad to you, just wait long enough. You get a chance. But I think be nice to everybody.
That is
I don't follow that now because I don't have to.
Right. Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. But I think that's great advice. I think too many people think of people as a transactional one-off relationship, and they don't think about them over the course of 20 years. And if it's sometimes, and you hear this from oil and gas people all the time, the service company guy that called the engineer 40 times and the engineer would never call them back. And now that engineer finds themselves unemployed and they're calling the person that they never answered the call to saying, have you heard of any jobs? And that's why I've always had a saying, I will take any meeting once, and I'll go for coffee with anyone once, because I just never know. And so just culling someone out before they have an opportunity to pitch themselves seems egregious.
And part of that is your network of people is so important. Treat everybody well. You never know who you're going to need in the future, and build that network. And that's great. And you're right. There were a lot of people that came up in this last boom that, I'm working for Chevron. I don't need to, we don't need to be in the local geologist society. I'm going to have a job forever. Now they aren't. Now they're unemployed. Well, how come, you should have been building that network when you didn't know you needed it?
Well, speaking of network, Gregory Wrightstone, thank you so much for joining on the show. You can follow him at inconvenientfacts.xyz. You can subscribe to the newsletter. He is off LinkedIn. And so that's the best way to follow you. Is there another way to follow you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, but Facebook's just gotten really, really difficult for me. It's just some changes that they've made. I don't know what the solution is. LinkedIn. I'd visit the CO2 Coalition website. That's easy to find. Google that. But inconvenientfacts.xyz. I will say I was a prolific writer, writing commentaries. I stopped that about 3 months ago. I've completely shut everything I was doing, nearly all interviews, except for you, because
I appreciate it.
That's what you do. And, I've stopped writing comics because I need to focus on getting this book done.
Well, I wish you best with the book. I will order 2 copies and I will download the app. For those Hot Take Nation, it looks like I'm going to be permanently lost with LinkedIn, and as you heard from Gregory and I, it's very interesting the way social media is moving. But you can subscribe to the podcast. You should. Let us know by writing a review that you like what we're doing and that we should keep up what we're doing. Subscribe to the newsletter. I too have been writing less than I used to, in part because I feel frustrated at the fact that a voice can be quieted. But when I get back, we're going to do the 7 hottest takes, like the 7 deadly sins, and it's going to light the world on fire. So subscribe for that. Until next time, be safe, be good, have a great day, and bye for now. Thank you, Gregory.